would love to entertain any questions about the work. But just by way of background, I had left here, as Dan said, 19 years ago. I think it's been 19 years ago, and had enjoyed great mentorship under Mike Powell. And we were still, this building hadn't been built yet, obviously, but I really had a strong desire to teach and to be out kind of on my own. And through circumstances and through a couple years of doing other things, I ended up finally at a Japanese church in Salt Lake City and began pastoring there. And it was all in all, it was a good experience, but it was also very difficult. The Japanese people were wonderful, but the denomination I was a part of was not so wonderful. And it led to some conflicts. And finally, because of the conservative, I would say biblically based nature of my sermons, we had to part ways. They got tired of that, believe it or not. So at that point, I was working part-time. I had my own nonprofit called Equip Utah. And so now I was out of the pastorate, and I thought, well, I think it's time to take this full time. And so that's what I began doing, and I was primarily working with business people and adults in terms of training and teaching and running Bible studies, and was able to kind of start another church in the Ogden area, just a small church plant. And I knew some people up in Park City. And one of the guys had said, well, why don't you, I'm going over to Uganda to teach, would you like to come? And I had been overseas a couple times, and once with Dan actually to Azerbaijan, which was a great experience. But I had never considered Africa before. In fact, believe it or not, and I know probably a lot of people, a lot of missionaries would say this, there was a time when I first went into missions and I thought, Lord, please, I'll go just about anywhere, but not that continent, not Africa. I really literally said that. And so I ended up in Uganda teaching just for about a week. And I remember the last day there, I called my wife and I said, Carrie, I know you don't believe this, but I really like it here. And I don't want you to be scared, but I can see us at some point living here in Africa. That did scare her. But it was very illustrative of how God works, obviously, in people's hearts. And so a place that I never envisioned going, I ended up really getting a heart for. And so with my friend who had taken me over to Uganda, we kind of partnered and started going to Kenya and working with pastors there. There was such a tremendous need for biblical training, because most of them just don't have it. They can't afford it, or that it's just not, there isn't a Bible college near them. Now, in the bigger cities, in Nairobi and even Eldoret and Mombasa, you could find some training, but it's really not quite on par with what you would receive here in the States. And so pastors really are almost coming out of the woodwork for training, because they understand that there's this, they don't know how to preach the Bible. They don't know how to teach it. And many of them, believe it or not, really could not articulate the gospel. I was in Mombasa last year, and one of the guys that was teaching with me, he's a former Muslim and now has his own ministry there, and he grabbed me and he said, Brad, he goes, you have to know this. He goes, there are pastors here that do not understand the gospel. They can't preach it, they can't articulate it, and you have to tell them, you have to explain the gospel to them. It was very eye-opening, because there's so many churches over there, and so many pastors and bishops, and titles are a big thing over in Kenya. But it's not based upon any type of academic or even spiritual qualifications. People just, if they say they're a Christian and they'd like to be a pastor, then if the church thinks that's okay, then that's what happens, believe it or not. So that's just to kind of set the table. There's this, I guess I couldn't state it enough. There's a tremendous need for this type of teaching, and the pastors are all over it. I've made some connections with several bishops and leaders over there, and they're now that I'm kind of coming in with this new ministry with simply just kind of more an emphasis on deeper teaching. Man, they're blowing up my messages and my email and saying, Brett, when you coming over? When are we going to, do these courses. I have people, this one bishop up there who's pretty influential, he said, we can go all over East Kenya and I can find places for you to teach. And so now it's just a matter of trying to find the time to get over there enough. My schedule, because I'm still doing work here in Utah, I don't have, I'm trying to fit in 3 to 4 trips a year of 2 weeks each time. I would love to do more, but there would have to be some things that would change. We'd have to obviously bolster our financial support, but also I'd have to really shuffle some things and maybe commit, more of my time to Africa. I did tell my wife I've told her every time I come back, I said, you need to come over and just see it and experience the people here. And I can show you some property and some neighborhoods that you would like. I got an email from one of the guys that was in the class. Well, he was a coordinator, but one of the guys, Pastor Silas, who was there and kind of hosting things, he had stopped me before I left, and he said, he goes, land here is really cheap. You can get a nice plot of land, you can build a house, and even build a church if you wanted to. So he texted, or Danje, our mutual friend, texted me and said, Pastor Silas said he's got a plot of land for you, and, is just waiting for you. So it is, as you can expect, incredibly dirt cheap to buy property. Almost all the people grow corn. And so I thought to myself, I'd have a crop of corn and a couple goats, and, then we do the ministry there. Haven't shared that with my wife yet, but so I don't know what God is doing. It may be that He would keep us here. There's still work. I have this church in Ogden that I'm building into, and so I don't know where the future leads. I do believe though that He'll continue to send me back to Kenya and continue to provide for that, because just the need is remarkable, and that's the one thing that I think really continues to keep me excited about this. I should admit to you that, as Dan said, I thought so well during that sermon was, it's, missionary work, it's, I don't know how to describe the situation in Africa, because it has been such a blessing to me personally, and to be able to go and see, ministries change just of sharing this book. This is the book on hermeneutics. And like I said, I love to teach. I think I've been gifted to teach, but it doesn't have anything to do with my gifting here. I'm just really just teaching the book, and these guys are going along with it, and we break them up into small groups, and they learn that way. But, what I've felt is that this is, there's a real darkness there because of a lack of knowledge. And it is a difficult place to be. You get used to things here in America, and all of a sudden you're thrust into a third world country like this. And it's just, I don't know, I've been 6 times now to East Africa, and this last time I think was the most difficult in terms of the poverty just hit me, and the dirt and the uncleanliness, and just some of the things just really was starting to wear me down. And one thing I'll share with you, and you may not want to have anything to do with me or the ministry after I share this, but I think it's important I be transparent, and I'll show you the wisdom of my wife. But halfway through this last trip, I was a little discouraged by the things I just mentioned to you. And one of the things we do is at lunchtime, we take break and we eat lunch together. It's always the same thing, always the same food. And that's always, not always, but kind of difficult too. The food's not great over there. And so we're eating lunch, and there's one guy there a lot of them don't, I'm going to say this politely, is that not everybody has the greatest table manners, and they eat differently. A lot of them eat with their hands, and they make a lot of noise. And so this guy next to me, who has become a good friend, he's just eating loudly, and he's right in my ear, and I'm starting to get upset, internally. It's like, what are you doing, And so I called my wife later on that night, and I said, honey, I just, sometimes this place is really difficult. And I started to explain that, and she said, she paused, she goes, it'd be really kind of interesting if you were to come back from Kenya and never go again and say that, well, the reason was because people ate too loud. and therefore you wouldn't be able to help shed light in a dark place. That's very convicting. And so, you were mentioning this too, and the idea that there's got to be a greater motivation. And I love to travel. The international travel is exciting, it's great. I love the people there. It's great to be around them and see the hunger, but more than anything, and I didn't think I'd get emotional today, but at the end of his sermon, it just hit me. But I think more than anything, there's this, the fact that God's word is going out, and you can see people, and they're getting it in the midst of your teaching, and it's unlike, and I'm not comparing it to UBC or any other church necessarily, but in the West, you just don't see it like this. And they're just so hungry for the word, and as soon as you finish, it's like, please come back, please come and build a house, come live here. We need this teaching. We need it desperately. I mean, I'm sure that you feel that way about hearing the word as well, but there's something about getting it like this in Kenya. And so that has been far and away the thing that kind of puts wind in my sails. And so usually when I get back, it takes me a week to kind of come down, and there's some jet lag and just fatigue. And then after, it's like, I'm not ready to go back for a while. And then a week passes, and it's like, all right, let's start making plans. I start making calls to my people in Kenya, and I said, okay, here's the curriculum, and let's get ready. So it's an amazing thing that God does in kind of a selfish heart like mine that's very used to comfort. And I love living in Utah, and I love the mountains and skiing and everything that it affords there. And I love good meals and all that stuff. And so don't get me wrong, it's really not a sacrifice to go there. I'm not saying that. But it takes a little bit to get geared up. But for me, usually it's about the first week or 2 weeks back, and it's like, okay, we need to go back. This is the place to be. So that's kind of the overview of what we're doing over there. Any questions off the bat? Yes?
Well, first, thanks for being transparent. I feel like I know you just by the way
Sure. Yeah.
So you have a ministry in Utah,
Mhm.
which is established.
Yes.
Yeah. And then you mentioned 4 to 6 times a year you go to Kenya.
3 to 4 is what I'm trying for. Yeah. It's been 3 up to now. Yeah.
Math is not my subject.
Yeah.
3 to
That's
4.
okay.
So do you see, it looks like there's a passion to possibly do that more
Yes.
in the future?
Yes.
So right now what you're doing, you're trying to figure out ways to get support and make that happen.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so those are the variables or the factors or support, and then also being able to break away and having, I guess, the clear direction to, okay, so maybe lessen, or not, I don't want to say diminish, but maybe put some of the ministry in other hands here so I can spend more time over in Kenya. So I really, and not to over spiritualize it, but I just feel God's hand has led throughout this whole thing. And so I'm just kind of waiting and seeing how that develops. But every time I go over there, it's like, I need to spend more time here. There's just not enough time. So, yeah, I think that's a great question. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. Anything else at this point? Yeah, Greg.
Two quick questions. The first is, next time I see Carrie, can I tell her about your land and your corn and your goats?
Yes, you may. Yep.
And the second is, in dealing with, like you mentioned the gospel and how they don't understand even the base concepts of Christianity.
Yeah.
For yourself, to boil that down into simplistic terms that you can communicate across to a different language in common tongue instead of Christianese like we use here.
Yeah.
Things like the gospel or faith or some of those other aspects. Has that affected how you interact and communicate with Christians back in the States as you return?
Wow. I hadn't thought about that, Greg, but no, it has. That's a great question. It has helped me to think through a little more about how I can articulate the gospel in maybe in a clearer sense. And because that certainly is what we have to do over there. And I remember a long time ago when I was just really kind of, I came on as Mike's associate and I was learning to preach. And I remember after one sermon he said, you got to remember, Brad, you're not preaching to a group of seminary students. You're preaching to, and he actually gave me names of people in the congregation. I won't say those names because some of them are still here, but he would say, this is who you're preaching to. This is who you're preaching to. Just people. They're not great academics. And it's not an offense, but the important thing about if you can't articulate the gospel to a young person, then you need to go back to the drawing board. So anyway, but yeah, it has, Greg. That's a good. It's been a good learning experience in that sense. Was there a second part to that? Or? Oh, okay. Oh, the first one was about my wife. Yeah. Okay. Of course. Yes, sir. Yeah, great question. Well, here's a wonderful thing about Kenya is that English is a second language. And so almost everybody speaks English. Now, in the classes, they prefer to use an interpreter. So I almost always have one, just because it's a little more clear. And there's, back to Greg's question, that there are some concepts and some words that they need to kind of wrestle with that I will use. And, they'll have to ask me, well, what does that mean? How can you explain that? So, but it works pretty smoothly. I've been trying to learn the language, Swahili, and it's not a difficult language, but, I'm in my 60s, and it's just, you guys that are in that, we just don't remember things as well. So every time I go over there, these guys are grilling me and they're helping me, but there's no way I can teach a class yet in Swahili. But it hasn't been an obstacle because, they get it. So, yeah. Well, one of the things I wanted to touch on, because it was really fun, is that in our book on hermeneutics, we're just talking about the very basics of how to approach the Bible and how to really study it instead of just read it. And so the curriculum that Dennis Mock, he's this pastor from Georgia that came up with this after he visited Kenya, he lays it out so well. And so there's 3 basic steps that we teach in studying the Bible, and that's to observe the text, to interpret the text, and then apply it. And so as we went through this section on observation, it was really fun because I would ask them a few questions from the Bible where they had information, and most of us have this information as well, but it's not based upon careful Bible study. So if I were to ask you, I'm probably giving it away, but if I were to ask you the question, how many wise men attended, Jesus' birth? Or at least, or attended, came from the east and were there for Jesus. How many? Everybody say 3. Most people say 3, but if you look at Matthew 2, what does the text say? You don't have to read that. We don't know. And so this was new to them, especially the pastors in the first city, which was in Kitale, because a lot of them just came in from the country and they stayed for the week. And by the way, they rented a little school, and they just brought mattresses in, and those guys stayed there for a week and just slept on mattresses on the floor. And that money came from the Equip Utah account, from us and from Help Here too as well, because they can't pay for that. And they said, can you pay for this, for lodging? And I said, I don't have that kind of money. We need to do something else. And so that's what they came up with, was the matches. But it doesn't matter to them because they're hungry for this. But anyway, so stuff like that was just really fun for them. And then I asked them the question out of Genesis 6, and where God tells Noah to, he's going to take all these animals into the ark. And so the question is, how was Noah able to gather the animals into the ark? How was he able to do that? Anybody know? Well, God did do it, yes. But what the text says, and it's at the very end of verse 20, where it says that the animals came 2 by 2 to Noah. And when we went through about 6 or 7 different people that were giving the wrong answers. And And then finally one guy got it right, and it was just an amazing moment. You know, it was just so fun. And so we just continued to do things like that. And this is just to observe the text, and we talked about what that means in terms of reading carefully and repeatedly and thinking almost creatively and prayerfully and just being patient. Brand new for them. So it was just that in and of itself was just, that happened on like the first or second day. It was just amazing. Yeah, Dave?
Well, I'm just curious because some of those illustrations you give, you know, they're common things about the three wise men and so
Yeah.
forth. In our experience, I just, you know, I mean, did they translate? Was that the way they thought also, or did they have
Yes.
something? Okay.
No.
I'm just wondering how many things, you know, culturally translate when it comes to just illustration.
Great question, and most of them do. I mean, the answer was three wise men. They thought it was three wise men, and you know, it's interesting that a lot of the pastors really have a good grasp of the Old Testament timeline and the patriarchs and the historical figures, which I thought. So there's a real stress on that, and there's a real emphasis on prophecy over there, which can lead to problems because there's a tendency towards the prosperity gospel and some crazy ideas that actually have come over, believe it or not, from America, and then they internalize that, and so there's a lot of churches set up that way, but they do understand a lot of these things. It's just the approach to actually learning to observe it and interpret the text, it just was very foreign to them. So we did kind of a thing that took a little more thinking out of Luke 15, where you know, you have the three parables that Jesus tells, and the setting is he's eating with sinners, and as the Pharisees would think, degenerates, and they're complaining. They say to his disciples, you know, why does your rabbi do this? And then he tells these three great parables. And now this is going to seem really simplistic to you, but this was another great moment. And you see that it's a parable of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the prodigal son. And I asked the class, so we kind of had them take time to read over it, and then I said, well, what was one word you would use to describe the parables as a whole? And I just wasn't sure where they would come, and the first guy stood up and he said lost. And then the next guy stood up and he said found. And again, I know it sounds simple, but it was just one of these moments where it was like, man, these guys they're just tracking so well, and they're just hungry. And it was a kind of an emotional moment. It was just one of those things where you see the kind of the light go on, and they're starting to appreciate the process of observing the text and then being able to interpret that. And so, you know, for me, because we're working with, you know, just Americans, we're just all used to this kind of stuff. But I will tell you that this one book on biblical interpretation, I'm going to use it. I'm going to start using it here and incorporate it in my own teaching and my sermons, because I think as a whole, we're not good at doing that. We're not good at really learning how to interpret the Bible, and because it takes time and it takes a lot of effort. And over here, we have a lot of the study helps. I'm sure you guys have a nice library. I remember at the old building, it was a huge library. They don't have anything like that. One friend of mine, a mutual friend of a guy who actually is working there, he's a native, he's a Kenyan. He is partnered with BTCP as well, and they've been teaching these classes. And so our mutual friend who lives in St. George asked me, he said, could you bring a copy of Wayne Grudem's Systematic Theology over? And it's a huge book. And I'm taking all these Bibles over, and I said, man, I don't know, you know, this is, I'm really stuffed to the gills, and I got 3, you know, duffel bags, but then I thought about it, and I thought, this is just a treasure for someone, and the fact that he wants this, and so I made room for it, had to take out a Bible, but made room for that, took it over, and I don't know if the pictures were up, but, okay. Okay. Oh, yeah, I mean, you can throw those up there. There was one picture with Samuel with, I think, a cop. I think it's up there with him. But okay, so that's that's the second group in Bungoma, and that was kind of the more mature pastors, but that's actually a very nice church building by Kenyan standards. So that was the first group. Then you can just move through the next one. So there he is. That's Samuel Shaboka, and he helped me teach a little bit over there, and we're going to be partnering next year with some classes, maybe in Nairobi. But just a great young man with a huge heart, and he's starting to build a library of commentaries and Bible helps, and that is just it's unheard of over there. Really, there's no way you can do that. They don't have bookstores like we do. There's a ship that comes into Mombasa, I don't know, every several months, and you can go there and buy books. That's a long drive and an expensive drive. So anyway, that's one of the needs over there. That's the group. We finished the first class, and so they're very big on completing things. It means a lot to them. And so this is the first class. There's 4 more, and then we're going to have graduations are huge over there. And so there'll be a lot of pomp and circumstance, and you wear the robes, and so it's a wonderful moment. But so that was number 1. That's our first class, and they're so proud, and they should be. I mean, they put in a lot of work. That was in the first group in Kitale Town, and that was one of the more lively guys, and he was our scripture reader, and so he would read scripture in English and Swahili. But if you get maybe the next clip will show that was okay. So that's we break into small groups quite a bit, and for the purpose of them working together and putting their heads together and starting to solve biblical issues. So that's one of the groups. I think there's probably a couple more. Yeah, that was one where yours truly was just teaching. But that's the first group, and you see plastic chairs. It's kind of a concrete floor, bars on the windows, and usually kind of a corrugated tin roof. I don't know if that was the case there. I think that was maybe wood, but it is pretty Spartan.
Is that the school, Brad?
That's part of the school. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very good. Another small group again. I wanted to put that in there because that's the typical meal. See, potatoes, rice, with some kind of mixture. I still don't know quite what that is. And so it's a very starch-heavy diet, and that's primarily what's. Now they have these little tortillas that are called chapati, and they're amazing. I love those. And then you'll have some greens, but that's basically it every day for lunch. And so now, again, I know I come off as seem selfish and spoiled, and that's probably true. And I do have a good attitude, and I'm always grateful when I eat it. But it's really good to get back home and eat food here. So anyway, that's one. Yeah, there's McDonald's in the bigger city, but yeah, and that's shaky. So that's Benjamin Mayo, and he's my chief coordinator. I met him several years ago, and without him, I don't think we'd be setting up classes like this. He's been amazing. He's a bishop now. He's a big guy, and but he's got the greatest heart. Yeah, he's just a wonderful guy, Benjamin Mayo. And there he is in the front row, just listening. That's in the Kitale class. I know some of this is redundant, and I just kind of threw these together. So that was the night I got to the airport, and we were packing everything into the car in the parking garage, and the security guy's working there, and he came up and he saw us putting the Bibles in, and he said, "Sir, can I please have a Bible?" And I was like, I mean, I needed every one for the students, but how could I say no? And so gave him a Bible, and that was another worker there, and you can see, I mean, he was just so, he's just, I never experienced things like that before here, where people come up and they say, can I please have one of those Bibles? And so anyway, that was a great moment right off the bat, right as I got off the plane. So obviously there's a great need for that. Kenya's beautiful. That's actually at the school. It's looking out of the church where we're doing classes. So everything's very green. It's kind of rainy season right now, and they're planting. And so everywhere you go, there's corn. There's corn everywhere, maize and some wheat, but that's their staple. And harvest season is very important. And if you don't have a good crop, this is subsistence living for many of them. And so a lot rides on the crops. Everything does. That's it. There you see the corn. A few landscapes. So that was a shot of, that's in Kitale, and that's out of my hotel window. And it just reminds me, I would go up there and kind of have tea in the mornings, and at night I would sit out there and I took a few videos of kind of things going on at night. It was one of my favorite spots, and that is actually one of the nicer spots in the city, overlooking that area there. You get a sense of the poverty, but nah, not really all of it. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think it's as prominent. They do in sense of titles, and then also that there is those that would live in the city and work in the city, and then those that are out in the country and are farmers, and that's all they do, or they have cattle, or like I said, a couple goats. And I think there is a little ranking that way, but I haven't been exposed to too much of that. I haven't heard, but that's something I should look into.
I was just curious, how do you address that, in a biblical way,
Yeah, no, but I tell you this though, that there is such that there's an emphasis on titles, and also in territory, and I discovered this really for the first time. I knew about it, but this time really came to pass. And you saw the picture of my friend Samuel, and I invited him to come teach, and the other pastors there were resentful of that, and they asked that they said, please, we don't need him, we don't want him. Great guy, godly man, very humble. And so that's something I will need to address in the future in terms of this territory within groups. And so if one particular bishop invites me out to speak for a week, I'm off limits to anybody else. They just, and part of it is because you don't get many Mzungus, many white guys out there, and so, and again, this is not a tribute to me at all. It's just the fact that I'm white, and I'm there to teach, and so they just guard me zealously. And it really is, I think it could potentially be a problem. So, you think you're close with that question? Yeah.
Just curious, you're training these pastors, they're finally getting a handle on Scripture and how to dive in and really analyze it.
Yeah.
Do you know, what did their sermons look like before they got this training? Do you have a feel for what sort of stuff they were actually preaching?
That's another great question. Well, just from what they've said and from what some of my coordinators have said, that a lot of it is repetition, and it's a lot of proclaiming. In other words, they'll hit on a few phrases or a few scriptures, and there's a lot of repetition and just a lot of ad lib that goes into that. And so, but if you were here for first service, I read a couple of the testimonies, and from what the guys said, it was like one of the guys said, I'm ashamed of the way I used to preach, and so now I'm starting to understand. So much of it is not. Now, I have been to churches there where at least one or two pastors handled the Bible pretty well. And they had some training. They had some seminary training. But for the most part, it's a lot. They'll take a particular theme or a book or a particular character, and they'll just kind of work on proclaiming and not teaching. And so, and it's, there's a lot of excitement, a lot of emotion. And a lot of that's spent during the music time and then the sermon, I guess. But yeah, it's a little different. But they're trying, they're trying. Yeah. Yes.
Do you minister with Isaac family there?
What's the last name?
Jill Van Horn and Isaac.
Oh.
Do you minister to them? And then also, I know they deal with a lot of tribal Civil War type stuff. Do you have experience doing that?
Not yet. Jill Van Horn? She was here when I was here. Okay, yeah. I didn't know she was in Africa.
No,
Oh.
her husband, Isaac, is from Kenya.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I haven't seen them for many years, but wow, I have to look into that. But there hasn't been any tribal problems. There is a group that in a far region called Turkana County, and it's on the border of the Sudan. And there's a huge refugee camp there. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people. And the pastor has asked me to come up there. It's a very dangerous area. And there is a warning from the State Department for no travel. And it's funny because we were texting, and I said, you know, Edward, I can't, you know, I can't go up there right now because your own country says don't go there. And he says, well, you know, pastors, there's always risks with the gospel. And I said, yeah, but I'm not ready to take that one. So, there are parts in the near the borders where it gets a little tricky. But Kenya's really, say it's a 90% Christian country, and that's in name. But you get a sense of, you know, just feeling safe there. Now, I try not to go out at night by myself because anytime a white guy goes out at night, he's a target. And of course, you would expect that. But yes?
You mentioned earlier prosperity gospel influence there. You just mentioned being Christian country in name only.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that because of the so-called promises given in the prosperity gospel, many people profess Christ, but it sounds like based on the experience you've had with perhaps with even not knowing the gospel, they may be part of the victims of that movement.
Yeah. Yeah, no question. And, I haven't been into it too heavy yet because, my coordinators there have been fairly selective about who they're choosing, who they're getting. Many of them have been touched in some way by the prosperity and the word faith movement. But we will get to that, when we go through these courses, and that's one thing we'll be talking about. And so we'll see how the reaction is, because there's some different cultural and different theological stances that we're invariably going to hit. One would be women pastors. There are usually a couple women pastors that come to the classes. And BTCP's, their approach to that is, yes, you can come to the classes, but there's another 10 course that the women may not come to, and that's to certify a pastorate, kind of a pastor degree. And they won't allow that for women. And so, but that's just one of several things that we'll encounter. But how are we doing on time? Yeah.
Probably just a couple of minutes.
Okay. Yes? Yeah.
If it's 90% Christian, what's the predominant historical denomination that they're coming out of? Like, my family grew up Northern Presbyterian. I was saved in a Southern Presbyterian church in 1960. So I understand teaching the Bible without the gospel.
Yeah.
And then going to a church where it was preached, which is why I work with Child Evangelism Fellowship to get the gospel in children's ministry. But what's the background denomination there?
There's a lot of them. Is that Sue Genstrom? Gosh, my eyes are horrible. Hello, Norris. Hi.
He's ushering the door.
Good man. No, Sue, you know what? There's a lot of denominations represented there. At least the ones that I've seen most are the Assemblies of God. So there is a big, deep, charismatic movement there. And that would be the other issue, of course, that we'll get to. And there's almost always, in the services I've attended, there's tongue speaking. And it's of kind of a very confusing type that would be forbidden by Paul in 1 Corinthians, because there's no interpretation. And everybody is just kind of speaking a tongue, and it's very emotional. So Assemblies of God, there are some more, I think, conservative denominations there, but they're not as prominent as the charismatic churches. So that would be, at least so far in my experience. I'm not sure in Nairobi yet, but I imagine that's kind of the same thing in there. Anything else? Dave?
I just wonder if there's something about the culture that makes them particularly
Yeah, well, yeah, Dave, I think it begins with the kind of the name it and claim it, or the prosperity, which begins, and of course, you know, if you live in that type of poverty, then it becomes much more attractive if these promises are being made to you. And really the sad thing about that is many of the pastors and even bishops, that they really will exploit that for their own financial gain. And this comes from my friend Benjamin and others that will tell me these stories about the corruption that's in the church. And so where there's money to be made, even those who have titles as pastors are behaving in ways that are just awful. So I think that's where it begins, and then there's a real sense of emotion in the worship services. The music goes on for a long time. It's very repetitive, and again, there's a lot of dancing. And I do have a video that I've locked away in a vault that has me actually dancing with a group, and no one will ever see that, but I just kept it in case for some reason, I don't know. But so I think that's it, Dave, and I think that was just after the colonists left. I think that was one of the groups that came in first, were the charismatics, and so they've got to. And I'm not demeaning charismatics, but just saying that this is the denomination that really seems to be prominent there. Yeah. Maybe one more question. Thank you so much for giving me the time. I always love to talk about Kenya, and it's just great to be back at UBC, and just appreciate your guys' prayers for us. It means a lot. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, so if you weren't at the first service, come to the second service. Brad will give just a couple minutes update there too, just a few other little nuggets that you didn't hear here. We do like to mention with missionaries that if we never want you to feel pressured, arm twisted to give, but often people, they'll ask, like, hey, is there a way I can give, whether it's to support a project like that or just their travel up here. And so if you want to give in a designated way, you could indicate that like on a check, like the memo of a check that goes in the offering box, and just indicate that it's for Brad Kramer. What would be other strategic ways somebody can indicate that, Dave?
I think there's envelopes back there.
Okay.
So if you could just write his name on there, if you write to us from, we'll credit you as part of donation records. But make sure his name's on the envelope, and you can put cash in there.
Yeah. Okay. So if it's an envelope, you can put cash in. But again, as we talked about, Norris is holding this up. As we talked about during the message, and you'll hear second service if you weren't there, there's a lot of ways that we can support, even that are non-financial, whether it's just praying and being aware of it, different needs, communicating, being in the loop on that. Coming to a class like this, you can just know what's happening with different people that we're connected with in some way. That's a form of support that goes beyond monetary as well. Well, I want to pray. I want to pray for Brad, and we'll wrap up. Lord, I am thankful for Brad, thankful for Carrie, and just their years here in our body, and pray that as Brad considers what the years ahead look like and how he balances ministry in Utah with the ministry in Kenya, and give him wisdom on that for what would be the most strategic use of time and resources. And I pray that the men who are going through these courses and hearing these things and bringing them back to their own churches, that it would transform their teaching and shepherding of local bodies. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.